December 1914. Europe was buried in mud, fear, and endless gunfire. The Great War had raged for 5 brutal months, and soldiers on both sides were already realizing that the promises of home by Christmas were nothing more than wishful lies. But then, something unthinkable happened, something so human, so impossible, that even today historians struggle to fully explain it. Along the frozen trenches of Belgium and northern France, a strange silence began to fall. Not the silence of peace, but the silence that comes before something, extraordinary. It started in the German lines. Small lights appeared, tiny flickers dancing on the edge of no man's land. British soldiers peered through the darkness confused. Were they lanterns? Torches? Then came the sound of singing. Stille Nacht, Heilige Nacht, Silent Night. The same melody the British knew by heart. Some soldiers joined in softly, their voices trembling in the cold. What followed would become one of the most remarkable moments in human history. On Christmas Eve and Christmas Day 1914, across scattered parts of the Western Front, enemies laid down their weapons. They called out to one another, "Merry Christmas, Tommy! Fröhliche Weihnachten!" And slowly, cautiously, men began to climb out of their trenches. What had started as singing turned into handshakes, laughter, and the exchange of small gifts, cigarettes, chocolate, plum pudding, even buttons torn from uniforms. They were soldiers, yes, but that night they were simply men, cold, exhausted, and desperate for something human in a world gone insane. In some sectors, they even helped one another bury the dead. For weeks, bodies had lain in the mud between the lines, unreachable, rotting under the frost. Now, men from both armies worked side by side, saying quiet prayers over the fallen. Letters home would later describe the scene with disbelief. "I think I have seen today one of the most extraordinary sights that anyone has ever seen," wrote Captain A.D. Chater of the 2nd Gordon Highlanders. Private Frederick James Davies of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers recalled trading cigs, jam, and corned beef with the Germans. In those frozen hours, the line dividing friend and enemy blurred completely. But perhaps the most famous story, the one everyone still talks about, is the football game. For decades, people have said that British and German troops held a match right there in no man's land, a proper game with a score and all. It's a powerful image, a football bouncing across the mud as rifles lie forgotten on the ground. Historians now say that while there's no evidence of a full organized match, plenty of soldiers mentioned casual kickabouts. They kicked tins or makeshift balls, laughing like boys again. It wasn't about winning. It was about remembering what life felt like before the war. The truce didn't happen everywhere. In fact, many sectors saw no peace at all. Some officers refused to allow any contact, and there were still gunshots in other parts of the front that same day. But across the Ypres salient, at places like Plug-Stert Wood, Plug Street to the British, and Messines, men defied orders and reached across the divide. Even French and colonial troops took part in some areas, though the heaviest participation came between British and German soldiers. Recently uncovered records even suggest that Indian troops joined in at least one sector. Each truce was local, spontaneous, and fragile. Yet together they formed a tapestry of humanity across miles of devastation. And while the soldiers on the ground may have wanted the peace to last, the generals did not. High commands on both sides were furious when reports reached them. Fraternization with the enemy was seen as dangerous, a threat to discipline and morale. New orders were issued, warning troops never to repeat such behavior. By the next Christmas, artillery and barbed wire made sure there would be no repeat of 1914's miracle. Still, what those men did couldn't be undone. When you read their letters, preserved today in the Imperial War Museum and the National Archives, it's striking how ordinary their words sound. They don't boast about peace. They don't try to sound heroic. They just describe what they saw. The lights, the singing, the simple joy of shaking hands with the very men they'd been told to hate. One soldier wrote that it felt wrong to start shooting again afterward. Another said the next day, when orders came to resume fire, we did so slowly, almost unwillingly. That hesitation, that moment of shared decency, is what makes the Christmas truce unforgettable. It wasn't a grand gesture from politicians or generals. It was a decision made by ordinary soldiers waist-deep in mud to act like human beings for a single night. The aftermath was bittersweet. Commanders worked quickly to suppress news of the truces, fearing the public would see it as weakness. Official war diaries barely mentioned it or glossed over the events. But word spread anyway, through letters home, through families, through stories whispered among veterans after the war. Today, historians know for certain that the truce happened, not as one massive coordinated event, but as a patchwork of small, local miracles. The carols, the gift exchanges, the burials, the laughter, all are backed by first-hand accounts. The football game, meanwhile, lives on more as legend than fact, though fragments of truth lie beneath the myth. Over 100 years later, the places where it happened, Messines, Plögstirt, the fields near Ypres, still bear quiet memorials. Stone plaques and small crosses mark where enemies once shook hands. Every Christmas, visitors come to stand in those same fields where the air feels heavy with history and silence once again covers the land. The Christmas truce didn't change the course of World War I. The fighting returned. The trenches filled again with smoke and blood. Millions more would die before the guns finally fell silent in 1918. But for one brief moment, in the midst of horror, humanity broke through. The war machine paused, not because of orders, but because men on both sides remembered that they were still human. It's easy to dismiss that as sentimental, as a tiny spark swallowed by darkness. But maybe that's the point. Even in the worst moments of history, that spark matters. It reminds us that compassion doesn't die easily, even when surrounded by hate. So when you hear the story of the Christmas truce, don't think of it as a fairy tale or a myth. Think of it as proof. Proof that even in the bloodiest war, kindness found a way to survive. And perhaps that's why the memory of 1914 still resonates today. Because deep down, we want to believe that no matter how divided people become, there's always a moment, however brief, when we can look at one another and see not enemies, but equals. For a few frozen hours on that winter night, the soldiers of World War I showed us exactly that.